The Lottery, Part 3. Directions. Number of paper 1 to 8. As you watch the video, pause to answer each of the questions on paper. The answers only have to be one sentence each. When you are done, take a picture of the paper and submit it as an assignment. Characters. Pause now to review the characters in the lottery. Press play when you're ready to continue. Mr. Summers called his own name and then stepped forward quickly and selected a slip from the box. Then he called, "Warner!" 77th year I've been in the lottery, Old Man Warner said as he went through the crowd. 77th time. Watson! The tall boy came awkwardly through the crowd. Someone said, "Don't be nervous, Jack." And Mr. Summers said, "Take your time, son." Zanini! After that, there was a long pause as everyone held their breath until Mr. Summers, holding his slip of paper in the air, said, "All right, fellas." For a minute, no one moved, and then all the slips of paper were opened. Suddenly, a woman began to speak at once, saying, "Who is it? Who's got it? Is it the Dunbars? Is it the Watsons?" Then the voices began to say, "It's Hutchinson. It's Bill. Bill Hutchinson's got it." "Go tell your father," Mrs. Dunbar said to her older son. People began to look around to see the Hutchinsons. Bill Hutchinson was standing quietly staring down at the paper in his hand. Suddenly, Tessie Hutchinson shouted to Mr. Summers, "You didn't give him enough time to take any paper he wanted. I saw you. It wasn't fair." Pause now to answer the questions. 1. How does Tessie react to Bill being selected for the lottery? 2. What does her reaction imply about the lottery? What does it tell us about the lottery? Pause now to answer the questions. Press play when you're ready to continue. "Be a good sport, Tessie," Mrs. Delacroix called. And Mrs. Graves said, "All of us took the same chance." "Shut up, Tessie," Bill Hutchinson said. "Well, everyone," Mr. Summers said, "that was done pretty fast, and now we've got to be hurrying a little bit more to get done in time." He consulted his next list. "Billy said, you took a slip of paper as the head of the Hutchinson family. Have you got any other households in the Hutchinsons? Any married sons or other family members living with you?" "There's Don and Eva," Mrs. Hutchinson yelled. "Make them take their chance." "Daughters are with their husband's family, Tessie," Mr. Summers said gently. "You know that as well as anyone else." "It wasn't fair," Tessie said. Pause now to answer the question. 3. How has the mood changed from the beginning to now? In other words, does this still feel like a cheerful story? What feeling does it give you now? Pause now to answer the question. Press play when you're ready to continue. "I guess not, Joe," Bill Hutchinson said regretfully. "My daughter Eva is with her husband's family. That's only fair. And I've got no other family except my kids." "Then, Bill, it's your family," Mr. Summers said in explanation. "And as far as taking a slip of paper for households, that's your family too, right?" "Right," Bill Hutchinson said. "How many kids do you have, Bill?" Mr. Summers asked formally. 3, Bill Hutchinson said. "There's Bill Jr. and Nancy and little Dave and Tessie and me." "All right then," Mr. Summers said. "Harry, you got their tickets back?" Mr. Graves nodded and held up the slips of paper. "Put them in the box then," Mr. Summers directed. "Take Bill's and put it in." "I think we ought to start over," Mrs. Hutchinson said, as quietly as she could. "I'm telling you, it wasn't fair. You didn't give him time enough to choose. Everybody saw that." Mr. Graves took the 5 slips of paper and put them back in the box, and he dropped all the other papers onto the ground, where the breeze caught them and lifted them off into the sky. Pause now to answer the question. 4. Bill Hutchinson won the lottery. Why do you think Mr. Summers is asking if anyone else lives with him or if there are any other people in his family? Pause now to answer the question. Press play when you're ready to continue. Listen, everybody, Mrs. Hutchinson was saying to the people around her. Ready, Bill? Mr. Summers asked, and Bill Hutchinson, with one quick glance around at his wife and children, nodded. Remember, Mr. Summers said, take the slips and keep 'em folded until each person has taken one. Harry, you help little Dave. Mr. Hutchinson took the hand of the little boy, who came willingly with him up to the box. Take a paper out of the box, Davy, Mr. Summers said. Davy put his hand into the box and laughed. Take just one paper, Mr. Summers said. Harry, you hold it for him. Mr. Graves took the child's hand and removed the folded paper from the tight fist and held it while Dave stood next to him and looked up at him wonderingly. Nancy is next, Mr. Summers said. Nancy was 12, and her school friends breathed heavily as she went forward, swishing her skirt, and took a slip daintily from the box. Bill Jr., Mr. Summers said. Billy's face turned red, and as he approached, his large feet nearly knocked the box over as he got a paper out. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. She hesitated for a minute, looking around defiantly, and then she pursed her lips and went up to the box. She snatched a paper out and held it behind her. Bill, Mr. Summers said, and Bill Hutchinson reached into the box and felt around, bringing his hand out at last with the slip of paper in it. Pause now to answer the question. Press play when you're ready to continue. 5. We already saw the initial lottery. What's happening now? Is this a second lottery? Who's involved? Pause now to answer the question. Press play when you're ready to continue. The crowd was quiet. A girl whispered, I hope it's not Nancy. And the sound of the whisper reached the edges of the crowd. It's not the way it used to be, Old Man Warner said clearly. People ain't the way they used to be. Pause now to answer the question. 6. From everything we've learned about him, how would you describe Old Man Warner? Think about his speech, attitude, and the way he impacts other characters. Pause now to answer the question. Press play when you're ready to continue. All right, Mr. Summers said. Open the papers. Harry, you open little Dave's. Mr. Graves opened the slip of paper, and a general sigh of relief went through the crowd as he held it up, and everyone could see it was blank. Nancy and Bill Jr. opened theirs at the same time, and both beamed and laughed, turning around to the crowd and holding their slips of paper above their heads, showing the rest of the villagers that they were blank. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. There was a pause, but Tessie wouldn't open her paper. Then Mr. Summers looked at Bill Hutchinson, and Bill unfolded his paper and showed it. It was blank. It's Tessie, Mr. Summers said, and his voice was hushed. When she didn't open the paper, he said, Show us her paper, Bill. Bill Hutchinson went over to his wife and forced the slip of paper out of her hand. It had a black spot on it. The black spot Mr. Summers had made the night before with the heavy pencil in his coal company office. Bill Hutchinson held it up, and there was a stir in the crowd. Pause now to answer the question. 7. Why do you think Tessie didn't want to open her slip of paper? Pause now to answer the question. Press play when you're ready to continue. All right, folks, Mr. Summers said, let's finish quickly. Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. There were stones on the ground with the blowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box. Mrs. Delacroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both of her hands. Then she turned to Mrs. Dunbar and said, "Come on," she said, "hurry up." Mrs. Dunbar, gasping for breath, took small stones in both of her hands, and she said, "I can't run at all. You'll have to go ahead, and I'll catch up with you." The children had stones ready, and someone gave little Davy Hutchinson a few pebbles. Tessie Hutchinson was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. "It isn't fair," she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Old Man Warner was saying, come on, everyone." Steve Adams was in the front of the crowd of villagers, with Mrs. Graves beside him. "It isn't fair! It isn't right!" Mrs. Hutchinson screamed. And then they were upon her. Pause now to answer the question. What happened to Tessie? Pause now to answer the question. Press play when you're ready to continue. Here's our recap. Time, summer before noon, still June 27th, and place in the cleared space in the village square. Characters, well, Old Man Warner says there's always been a lottery. It seems like it's some kind of superstition to make the crops grow or something. He calls people who want to quit the lottery a pack of crazy fools. Plot, well, the slips of paper are opened. Mr. Hutchinson wins. They have a second lottery, and Tessie wins. Tessie says it isn't fair. People throw stones at Tessie. What's the theme or the message? Well, tradition can cause people to do terrible things. It appears that they've murdered Tessie. People conform to be like everyone else. Mr. and Mrs. Adams were talking about giving up the lottery, but they're right there on the front line throwing stones. People go along with tradition without thinking. And that's the end.